Hello. First of all, let me thank the organizers for the event and inviting me. I'm really glad to be here. Um, as you can see from some of the signs in my first slide of the presentation, I'm a sociologist, not a historian. So please forgive me for everything that's wrong with my historical facts. I'm not doing research on history. My interest is how memory works in Latvia and works in case of Holocaust. How infrastructure is set up. What are the main media discourses, and also what people in Latvia might know or might not know about the Holocaust. So I'd like to start with a one personal story. That's my hometown, Preļi. It's a middle-sized town, around 10,000 people where I lived here. And as you can see, it's quite close to Lithuania. When I lived there, we actually had some cross-border ties, like cultural events, sport events, and at one time I had a chance to see a Lithuanian television and watch basketball there, but that's not the topic. When I was 14, we moved to Riga, away from Lithuania and away from the little town. And when I entered the university, I was around 20. I had a great professor in history, and she taught something about the topic of the Holocaust, and I wanted to read a bit more. And I took a book, actually the only monography at that time on Holocaust by the local author. And when you come from a small town, you usually see everything connected with that. And I noticed information about Preļi, and I was really, well, I would say shocked. Shocked maybe is overused term, but I can't get a better one. I was really surprised, and I would say shocked as well. At that time, only at that time, I realized that what tragedy took place in Preļi. And we had this information at the opening of the conference. If we think of general numbers, then of course the bigger Jewish numbers were in big cities, and also the bigger killing numbers are in big cities, Riga, Daugavpils, Liepāja. But if we think of impact of Jews in the local communities, then we should think of southeastern part of Latvia, which is Latgale, and in many of those places, Jews made up to 20, 30, and even 50% of the local communities before World War II. And Preļi was one of that example. Actually, more than half of the population was Jewish before World War II, to be exact, 51% of the population. And at that time I was shocked that I could live up to 20 years and be able not to know anything about it. And as you understand, since then I've devoted my academic career trying to prove that there's not only problem in me, but there might be problem in culture as well. So I've never tried to be objective in any sense. I think there is a problem in the way Latvians perceive Holocaust, and I'm trying to understand how it all works. And when I started my study, first of all, to understand what happened, because I was born in the beginning of the 80s, and my teenage years went on in the 90s, so it's kind of change of regimes. And first of all, I wanted to understand what happened in the Soviet period. And of course, at the moment I can say that we can get a lot of good reads, precise information, but I think there are still a lot of misunderstandings, because these are the main concepts which are used writing about the Soviet period. I would say there's nothing wrong with withheld, prohibited, concealed, oppressed, because that's what it was. But the main concepts used are taboo and forbidden. And when I first came up with those words, I thought, well, especially in Stalinism, but in the Soviet period in general, if something is taboo or forbidden, there's no information about it. Shouldn't it be that way? But that's completely untrue, I would say. Of course, the attitude was shifting a lot, and the best example is Stalinism, where until 48 there was a lot of information, and then late Stalinism with all the anti-Semitic campaigns and almost no information about the Holocaust. But generally we can say that there are periods, of course the term Holocaust wasn't used until the late 80s, but there's a lot of periods when the information on Jewish extermination is a takes a big part in culture. And starting from the period just after the war till the 1948, where there are publications in media, where there are history books mentioning Jewish extermination, where there are publications of results of the Extraordinary Commission, and so on and so on. And then there's, of course, 60s with everything what happened in Rumbula, with the so-called reawakening of memory, and poems on Rumbula written by famous Latvian authors, and also literature on that. So to say that there was no information and then it was completely forbidden, to my mind is unprecise. And there are those two citations you can see. One is by the Latvian author, Latvian exile author, and writing on situation in Latvia, and the other is an author writing on the whole Soviet period. And I would say those citations are very unprecise. So there of course are tendencies, and I would never say that it was a big topic or something like that, but clearly there was information about the Jewish extermination. There are some interesting things with it. Of course, there much less information was in history books, much more in the literature, in the poems, as it happened with many topics which were not ideologically supported. And another tendency, the more official the history book, the less information it will contain on the Holocaust. For example, the issues of history of the Latvian SSR, the most it got was in 1959, where there were 9 lines on Jewish extermination. But again, we can't say that there wasn't any information. So, to my mind, the problem when Latvia regained its independence wasn't that there was no information about the Jewish extermination. The problem was that there was certain type of information, ideologically made up information, and the whole situation. I think there were 4 main factors, and among others, of course, which made remembrance of the Holocaust in 90s in Latvia almost impossible. First of all, it was Nazi propaganda myths of Jewish communism, which were very vivid among the emigres, certain groups of emigres, and emigres played a large role after the regaining independence of Latvia. Then there's Soviet anti-Semitism, then there's Soviet propaganda, which at certain times, especially in the 60s, did their best to emphasize local role in the Holocaust. Of course, there was a local role, but not a driving force in the Holocaust, as it sometimes was portrayed. And the first, and I would say the most important thing was the sense of suffering of Latvians. And Latvians in this case were ethnic group, not a political group. So this sense of Latvians as greatest sufferers all over the world also was one of the main issues which made the remembrance almost impossible during the 90s. And I can't go into much detail, but I think this is a very telling example right here, because most of the politicians will tell that Well, we are saying that all of the crimes are important and then we should know all of them. But this is a declaration of Latvian Parliament which went through in 1996. The declaration is on occupation, and you can see the discursive language and how those two crimes are labeled. So you can see the words used. The Soviet period is labeled as occupation, while Nazi Germany established its regime, and USSR carried out a genocide, but Nazi Germany carried out deportations. That's quite telling of this rivalry between being the biggest victim. I know that there's a study in Lithuania done by Johannes Langer on how memory works in Lithuania. I don't know how popular this study is, but I think that in the audience there are some persons which were interviewed for this project. So I think results are very similar, but one more word on the 90s. The most telling example about how memory worked in Latvia in the 90s probably is the political fate of Mavriks Wolfsons. Mavriks Wolfsons became a local celebrity in the end of the 80s in Latvia. He was Jewish, and then he was celebrated as the first one who mentioned occupation, who openly spoke about Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, and so on. But his political career faded very fast, and it faded because he started mentioning Holocaust as well. The most notorious moment was in Rumbula in 1991, in remembrance event, when he brought up this topic once again and told the things which I think we would agree nowadays with. He told that there was local collaboration during the Nazi period and we should condemn it. And also he told that Latvians are not interested in the Holocaust, haven't been interested in the Holocaust so far. And of course he mentioned some Soviet numbers on victims, which are not true, but at the time we didn't have different numbers, so nothing wrong with that. And in his answer, at that time Anatolis Gorbunovs was the Speaker of the Parliament. He brought up some old Nazi propaganda myth of Jewish Bolshevism and what Jews did to Latvians in the horror year. And looking at what happened, nothing happened to Anatolis Gorbunov's career. He went on being celebrated politician, but Mavriks Wolfson's political career declined very fast. Of course, he kept on bringing the topic of anti-Semitism and so on, but it was a non-topic in 1990s. If there was a, well, respectively looking at the media and so on, if the topic appeared, it mainly was because of the scandals. Things changed at the end of the 90s, as it probably happened in Lithuania. But here we come to the first, or it's not the first, but to a big problem. Because the topic was introduced not because someone in the local community wanted it. It was introduced because of the direct pressure from so-called international partners who stated if you want to join the European organizations, you have to do it. And it happened. Overall, I would say that it was a good thing. So Holocaust was introduced to school programs and many other things which happened, and commission of the historians was established and so on. But the problem is that people know this very well, that this didn't happen because some locals wanted it. It happened because of direct pressure, or someone else wanted it. And it is not seen as, oh, we didn't do that, it's bad, now we're doing it, but we didn't want to do it, and someone told us to do it. So, some words on a commission. In Latvia, it has done a great job. Most probably Holocaust is the best researched topic at the moment. The problem is that population doesn't know almost anything about it. To my mind, big problem was that most of those books were spread uncommercially. Went to the libraries, to the museums, anywhere else, but you wouldn't see it in the best bookshops. But that's only the part of the problem. When it goes to the bookshops, the big companies, or if they can be called big in Latvia, they have to sell them, and they get reviewers, analysts writing something, and discussion comes up. None of discussion has happened on those issues, which big, almost 30 issues of history being produced till the establishment of the commission. And actually we had a survey where we asked people, do you read academic literature and history, and 3% of the population answered that they do. Of course that question wasn't the best one, because we don't know if a person reads, for example, illustrated history. We have a pretty we have a journal in Latvia, Illustrated History, which is popular history, and maybe people think that this is academic history. So we don't know that. So the number might be lower than that. So overall, the work is done. There's a lot of information. You can find everything you want if you want. But of course, there are topics still, like local collaboration and some parts of Latvia, which isn't fully understood, and topic of Herbert Sukurs, which no one in Latvia wants to touch, instead of Andrew Azargailis, late Andrew Azargailis, who for some reason writes an apology for him and comes very close to saying that he's a national hero. To my mind, with that, he becomes a propagandist, not a historian anymore, unfortunately. But no, not a good historian that is written at the moment. Although topic is very popular, journalists, even sport journalists, are trying to do their best to write that history, but not historians. Instead of Andrew Azargailis, who's not evaluating fact, just saying that he's the best what happened to Latvia, close to that. Okay, and another big problem with that second period is that information on Holocaust became more available, but that was mainly international information. And I would assume that in 2005, Latvian citizens, Latvian population knew more about Anna Frank than on Shane Graham, which was a girl from Prague again, who also wrote a diary. But it has never been published in Latvian as a separate book. Latvians knew much more on Oskar Schindler at that time than they knew of Žanis Litke, who's the biggest Jew savior in Latvia. But that has changed, I think, since 2005. So there were a lot of information, but mainly it was international. Numbers, what Holocaust was, how it originated, but not what happened in the local area, how our neighbors or our society was killed. But it's changing, and still 2005 we have more and more of those projects, more discussion, but the problem still exists. For example, only one example. Forgot the name, unfortunately. The woman who survived in Rumbula, she wrote a memoir, and I wouldn't say it's the greatest piece of, maybe it's not, but it's a really important and a great book. But it was translated into Latvian in December of 2014. That says something about the info. Huh?
What language original language? Or?
I think it was originally in Russian, and it was published in 70s, around 70s. So it took many years to translate something like that into Latvian. So we're still missing those local products, which would show that it's not an international topic, not something what Nazis did or what happened in Western Germany, but what happened here. But we're getting more and more of that. Some of the popular culture is making noise publicly. People are talking about that, and it's getting better. So overall, I would say that there's a pretty simple but I think useful communication theory written by Muzaffar Sharif, who says that theory of social judgment, and he states that when we hear any message, whether visual or written or whatever, that message tends to drop into three big fields: field of acceptance, field of rejection, and field of non-interest. And for long in Latvia, the biggest fields when we think about Holocaust have been non-interest or rejection. If I make a big picture, well, which isn't very precise, I would say there's a small group of anti-Semites, radical anti-Semites, marginal group. Then there's a group of people who understand the Holocaust and try to promote memory of the Holocaust. And that group is growing, I would say, pretty fast. But the biggest group are people who don't want to know this, unfortunately. Because of this rivalry in many conferences, the first question after my speech is, well, that's very interesting, very nice, but why can't you do something what matters us? Why are you not doing our? Because there are so many people which are doing this topic already. Why would you, being a Latvian, can't do something which is important to us? So that's another topic. It's we and us, ethnical division. It's not a political category. Latvians, as Jews, most of the Jews killed in the Holocaust was actually Latvian citizens, had Latvian citizenship at that time. So that's in short my presentation.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Berzins. You stayed exactly to 20 minutes, so this must be some kind of Latin trick.
I tried it 3 times yesterday.
I have two questions very quickly to you. You mentioned Herbert Cukurs, and is he the one who flew the plane to Gambia and became the pilot? Yeah. And you mentioned that Dr. Ezergailis, is not that correct?
Yeah.
I happen to know Dr. Ezergailis personally. Sure. Did he write these heroic qualities of Cukurs in Latvian press or in?
At first he published in Latvian press, and now he has a book. It came out last year, and the book is his essays, and there's also that essay which is around 30 pages about Herbert Cukurs.
This is published in Riga?
Yeah, in Latvia, yeah, published also in media and afterwards as a book as well.
Yeah, it took me a little bit by surprise. I know his basic views, but when he published in English in the States, it was somewhat different. Yeah. I want to ask another specific question about that. This Victor's Ares Commando and the famous blue bus, yeah, which carried out a function similar to the Roll Commando here. Is that been something that has been better known now in general history, or is it still just academics speaking about those kinds of specific actions?
Mm-hmm. Well, I would say, yeah, it's getting better. I would say that Arais is very known, and no one tries to say that Arais was a good person in Latvia, but there's a big group who says that Herbert Cukurs was a hero, and he's been wronged down. So, to my mind, problem is that people know Arais, says that he's a bad person. The whole group with Arais, well, I'm not sure were they bad actually, but Arais was a bad person. But people don't want to talk that there was not only Arais Commando. There were many local commandos which supported the Holocaust in many ways. So we have that bad person one, but Cukurs, who was responsible for the cars and everything, motors working, and also rifles working. Well, somehow becomes a hero because he didn't want to join Naira as commando originally. He had to, and so on. So that discussion is very heated at the moment in Latvia, and of course, no one has written arguing that he's a criminal. Most of the books coming out are popular books on how he was flying and being good, and that's the main narrative at the moment, unfortunately. And as a guy, I agree. I wrote a review of his book, which was met well with at some circles with understanding. Some told me that you can't do that with such a professor. I admire Azargail's work a lot, but what he did, being old, well, he did harm to himself, I would say. I don't know why he did this, how he came to this, but that book is complete apology, saying that Herbert Cukurs is a hero.